I'm finally getting to talk about the Little Mermaid. Oh. Well, this version was directed by Rob Marshall, with a screenplay by David McGee, based upon the John Musker and Ron Clement screenplay, which was also then based on Hans Christian Andersen's original tale. It stars, that's a lot of people who've been involved, it stars Halle Bailey, Jonah Hauer-King, Javier Bardem, Daveed Diggs, and Melissa McCarthy. But we'll get to that later. Not a fan, but I'll explain more later, like I say. All of us growing up have at least one Disney film that is ours, if you will. It's part of our core childhood. We adopt certain elements into it as, when we grow up. For my partner Amy, it was The Lion King, and she had similar reactions to the remake of that as I did to this, because this was one of mine. It was part of my sexual awakening. The Ariel bit, not the fish, you weirdos. Although, no. But seriously, it was part of my childhood, and I'm not going to be one of those people who's like, well, this has ruined my childhood, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't say that I'd never watch this and just make judgments off what other people have said or just the trailers. I was fine to watch it. We have an active Disney Plus subscription, and I was like, well, I'll watch it when it's free. I'm not going to spend money on it. Or free, you know what I mean, included. So I'm making this judgment on my own, and like I say, I'm not saying that it's ruined my childhood. But the performances were generally okay in this. The changes that were made and things like that were okay in this. This was an okay film. This is part of my drive to talk more about mediocre films. I think being binary, or polarized, I guess, is a bad thing from a societal perspective. If everything's amazing or crap, where is the room for the okay stuff? So I'm definitely, in support of that idea. I've said it before, I'll say it again. But this was one of those where I felt like I should have been scoring as I go, because there were moments I was like, oh, if they do this, maybe I'd add like 5 points. Or, oh, that's a 2-point loss. And I'd probably come out I think I figured it out, even though I wasn't doing it, I'd have probably still come out maybe like a 6 at the end, 6.5 at a push. Which is fine. It's an okay film. That's a decent metric. It's more than half. There were more positives than negatives. I do want to make that very clear before I go into the stuff that I didn't like. There were more positives than negatives. Some of the negatives included that blooming song of Eric's, where you can tell there's meant to be passion in the song, but there isn't in the performance. I can tell you that now. That is not a passionate performance. Whilst it looked passionate, if you look at it and don't really focus on listening too hard, you can sell it to yourself that it's an impassioned performance. But I tell you, as a musician, as a singer, that's not a passionate performance. At all. I do not care. It did not need to exist, and I can't even remember the tune of it now. There are other things that just didn't work for me. Part of Your World is one of those songs that will always get a tear from me, because it's that hopeful, plaintive, I want song that Disney does so well. And most of them do have a reaction. But because this was part of my growing up, I think it holds that more special place. This was the first I want song I really paid attention to. And for the most part, I was like, okay, I'm okay with Halle's performance here. There was a couple of moments where she put a bit more grit to it, and I'm fine with that. A little bit more passion to it. It totally the opposite to Eric's song, huh? But that was fine. I was okay with it. And then what I've heard called, and I've heard it's called similar, the Mariah Carey warble thing happened, which I'd seen in a trailer, and it got me very upset with this film. But I heard it in the film after I was starting to get won over, and I visibly winced. Amy laughed at me. But I was there just, no. Daveed Diggs did well as Sebastian. I mean, although the skin colour's fine, from what I've seen, his heritage isn't Jamaican, but it's not my experience. I can't really comment on whether that's right or not. It might be me overthinking it. It just felt a bit wrong. But otherwise, yeah, I like the performance. The change of Scuttlebutt to Aquafina, I wasn't on board with necessarily at first, but when the Scuttlebutt, one of the songs that was done by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who did a lot of the extra lyrics for songs as well, that worked. It made sense because she also is a rapper. It's fine. It worked in that context. I'm happy with it. That's the moment that went, yes, it makes sense for this. Jacob Tremblay's great as Flounder, although the visual of Flounder I didn't like it as much. They're sort of realistic, but not in some ways. It's that weird, not quite Uncanny Valley, because obviously it's a fish, not a human, but something just didn't quite work for me. And then the the biggest thing... Well, actually, no. I'm going to talk about one good thing first. I did like Javier Bardem's performance. There was enough of the previous Triton in there. There were moments that clearly were... He's leaning towards that delivery, if you will. But it was still him. And I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. I think he was great for the role, to be completely honest. I almost wanted a crossover with Pirates of the Caribbean and have Salazar just like, wait, you look like me, but they're both Disney. Could happen. But yeah, the thing that I really didn't like is Melissa McCarthy. And I just don't find her funny. Her style of humour does not work for me. And I say that because I know what people are like. It doesn't work for me. If you like Melissa McCarthy, if you think she's amazing and funny, that's fine. That's your choice. Humour is subjective. But nothing that I've ever seen of her has convinced me that she's funny and worth my time. But the biggest problem I had in this is about a year after the passing of Pat Carroll, you've got her just basically doing a Pat Carroll impression. Which, okay, made her scenes less bad. Because one of the things I said when we hit play, I was like, if Melissa McCarthy is Melissa McCarthying all over this joint, I'm not going to be happy. But I genuinely had a moment of, I don't know which is the worse, of if she'd have done that, or this complete and utter Pat Carroll impression that, why not just overdub with the Pat Carroll lines? It would have been better. I mean, she does a good Pat Carroll impression, so I guess that's one thing that's going for her. See, I can not like people's comedy and stuff, but I can appreciate things about them. It's fine. But then you could tell that outside of the Pat Carroll impressions, she didn't have the voice down. When she was doing lines that were basically the same or very close to the previous performance, it was very good. But on some of her ad-libs or any like major deviations, it dropped. She cannot maintain the impression doing new lines. And that, again, was a downtick for me. There's so much here that could have been done better. I mean, one of the things I really liked, even from the start, was rather than just different coloured fins for the sisters, they had different fish elements. They made them more distinct, the family. And I appreciate that. It gives a lot more visual interest. And that's fine. Yeah, that's great. I will always be happy with that. Do make changes that enhance the material, the production, whatever. Because it just makes it worthwhile. However, like I say, there weren't enough that made me feel this was definitely worth doing. It still came out mostly positive. There were more positives than the negatives, as I say. But I don't feel it was necessary. This is well, we've got to maintain the rights and have a new version out so that, new kids grow up. There's one review that I saw. Again, I always hate to do this, but I was looking something else up and I happened to see it. They went to a theatrical screening and kids were walking around not paying attention. Again, the arguably intended audience, although I will get onto that in a second. There's a little mini rant before I finish. But kids were getting up and walking out or just looking at the phones. People were just not engaged. That is not a good sign. And I know what some people say, which is why I wanted to talk about this when it's like, the intended audience. Some people might say, like, you don't have to like it. You're an adult. So you don't have to appreciate it. If kids are enjoying it, that's what matters. An intended audience is an intended audience. Doesn't mean they're the only ones who can watch it. Adults can watch kids' films. Kids can, with supervision and proper understanding of whether they'll get the concepts and be able to deal with whatever's in it, theoretically watch more adult-oriented films. Again, it's by a kid-by-kid basis. If you know your child is fine with it, I've no issues. But I can watch this even if it's aimed at children because it's part of my childhood. And in fact, Disney want that. They want the older people to go and see it. Half of the reason they're doing all this is people grew up with this, let's get them back in cinemas rather than just re-releasing one. So, at the end of it all, my thoughts on this are yes, it's very much it's an okay film. I don't think it needs to exist, but if it has to exist, it's fine. There are people here whose performances I enjoyed. The music, of course, is always good because it's Menken and Ashman at the core, and Lin-Manuel Miranda for the other bits. I'm fine with a lot of this. The positives outweigh the negatives, but I can't ignore the negatives. And just to cap it off before I end, it's got nothing to do with colour of skin. Absolutely nothing. Halle Bailey was fine as Ariel. I've no issue at all. The Mariah Carey warble, not such a good thing, but everything else, I enjoyed the performance. So don't try and tar me with that brush at all. Little Mermaid didn't need to be redone, but it's fine. So thank you very much for letting me talk about this, and maybe I'll talk about the previous version at some point in the future as a little treat to myself. But until next time, as always, take care. And don't forget, darling, it's better down where it's wetter.